So I grew up in a Christian home, and we were the typical church-going family, always at church. My dad played drums in the worship band, and I went to a private Christian school. It was actually the same location as where the church was, and we were always there. It was awesome, and my teacher told me that I couldn't go back to school unless I was medicated because I was a little too rambunctious. Ended up putting me on medication. So at 5 years old, I was started on Ritalin, and that pretty much began a journey for me where I was labeled, medically speaking, with a disorder, a diagnosis. Actually, one thing led to the next. I started losing too much weight, so they switched medications. I started gaining too much weight. They switched it to another. I basically was diagnosed with another disorder called trichotillomania, where it was a form of obsessive compulsive disorder, and I started pulling out my eyelashes, and it was a very traumatizing thing because it was obvious to other people and the kids that there was nothing there. There was no hair, there was no eyebrows or eyelashes, and so that's when the name calling started, and it was really hard coming from a little girl who was always told she was beautiful. I was actually re-diagnosed with bipolar disorder rather than ADD. So they now medicated me on other drugs that I'd never been on before, and it was just this, I became numb. I was 12 and really just didn't want to live life that way, and so I became very rebellious and shut off to my family, church, the doctor's school. I really became, that's when I noticed there was just a change in my life. I just went inward, and it started this downward spiral of me reacting at school, and I now became one of the bullies, if you will, because I was kind of sick and tired of people bullying me, and so I put on that front, and that's now who I became. My identity was now tough girl Amy, and I started, refusing to take my medications, showing up to school late. Authority figures, I just would yell at them, and just even police officers I got really feisty with. So it was a bad time in my life, but then started tapping into drugs and not going home after school. Actually got to the point of overdosing, and I'd do lines of coke on the back of the toilet at school. I'd pay off the people because I'd show up to school late. I'd pay them off with cigarettes or weed, and I was dating drug dealers. My friend, we would go into the most ghetto slums of Chicago, and she would go to sleep with people, and I'd be sitting in the other room, and she would just tell me to go ahead and just sleep with people. It was like basically prostitution. It was ridiculous. That was my life. It's still pretty unbelievable. Being hospitalized, and it was an interesting experience to say the least, which it didn't stop. I continued using drugs, and so that was the time where I just really started relying on relationships and men to find my happiness, or I wouldn't even say happiness, just to find some sort of love. Fast forward, I traveled and moved outside of the state. I moved to that state for one guy, and then now I'm in another relationship because, it was just this perpetual cycle of relationships. And it was abusive at that point, and led me to this rock bottom place in my life where I knew that if I didn't leave, I would probably be hospitalized, or I would stay and just be stuck in it. And so by the grace of God, knowing I believed in Him, I just I prayed, even though it wasn't necessarily a prayer. I think I just spoke something out, and He made a way, and I took a position and moved from Minnesota to Florida. And I just Google searched churches in the area, and it led me to Celebration Church. And that next morning I routed myself there, and the usher greeted me right on up to the second row, and that was when it was one of those messages where everything was directly towards you, and I was crying, and at the end He said, if you if you want to live your life for the Lord, if you need His hope, then stand. And so I raised my hands, I stood up so quick, and that was the turning point for me, where I rededicated my life to Jesus Christ. And there was this unexplainable peace and confidence and joy, knowing that despite the hell I lived on earth and despite the sin I had in my life, that Creator of the universe and the one who put the stars in the sky, the one who did this whole thing for us and who died on the cross and who sent His Son, he chose me still through my mess, and He actually wiped me completely clean of it. For once, I actually understand what joy is, and I actually get to understand who Jesus is as my Savior, and know that I'm okay, and I don't need a man in a relationship to make me feel loved or comfortable, but His love is the best thing. And the freedom is, you can breathe, and you don't have to worry and live in fear of everything, really. If there's anybody who is able to relate to this, for them to just know that today's your day, that you don't have to live in that anymore. You don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to let the words of men or the words of doctors put a label over your life, because that's not who God says you are. That you are powerful and you are loved and chosen. And God is so good, and this is just the power of our testimony, is now that the things that He's set me free from, the bondages, chains, and addictions of everything. It's just now I get to help people, and I fully believe that God gave me my last name for a reason, so I can really help set people free.